Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
And thank you for joining us today for our session on Ollie Court, which is a really exciting project that in the heart of Eugene that is co-locating affordable housing with high quality childcare. Thank you for joining us again. My name is Matt Salazar and I'm Project Development Manager at Homes for Good, which is the lead developer on this project.
And my name is Patrick DeSales. I am the Operations Director for Head Start of Lane County, and I'm one of the early learning partners.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kelly Howell with Pivot Architecture, principal at the firm, and help lead the design of our team and development of the Ollie Court project.
I'm Judy Newman, and I'm with Early Childhood Cares at the University of Oregon. It's an early intervention, early childhood special education program for Lane County. And I was the former director and founder, and now the strategic advisor. I get to do these fun things.
So yeah, as you'll see as we talk more about this project, we have a big bench of folks who have been very involved from the very beginning of this project, and that's really what has led to, I think, great success in bringing folks to the table early. So just a little bit of information about the site itself. This is on a 3.0, just over 3.0 acre site that was a land bank site from the city of Eugene. It was formerly, at the beginning of this project, it was known for a long time as the Naval Reserve because it was an old Naval Reserve property. But for the last 15 years, it's been an undeveloped flat lot. It's in the Jefferson West Side neighborhood of Eugene, which is just in the heart of Eugene, just outside of downtown, in a fairly residential neighborhood, but it is off of two major arterials, which would be Chambers, you can see on that map there, and West 13th Avenue. And with the site, luckily, we've got a pretty big site, 3.0 acres. And we really wanted to get as many units on the site as possible while also kind of that always balancing the parking needs of the neighborhood. So we landed on 81 units and decided on to locate them in two buildings instead of having one very large building. So two buildings located around a central courtyard. We'll talk a lot about the design decisions that went into that. But also very key to this design and really the heart of this project is the ground floor early learning center, which is on the ground floor of the southernmost building along 14th Avenue. And as you see on the map, directly across the street from an elementary school. Yes. All right, some basic features. So on the residential side, we have a total of 81 units. Most of them are family size units. We really wanted to lean towards serving families in the neighborhood. This is in the census tract, there are about half the number of or half the percentage of families with children in this census tract than are in the rest of the city of Eugene. So that's despite the fact that there are a number of great family amenities in this neighborhood. So wanting to have more housing opportunities for larger family sizes, but also knowing that there's a great need for one-bedroom units as well. So we have 80 project-based vouchers and one manager unit in the project. And then for the Early Learning Center, which we've recently named the Leap and Learn Center, it's 6 classrooms that will be co-operated by 3 different childcare providers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Just to get a sense of the capital stack, this is a project that the total amount for the construction of this project is about $48 million. And what I really want to hone in on is the sources that we had to target for the construction of the Early Learning Center. As we went through the visioning of this project, we learned from our early learning partners how important it was to keep their rent, because they will be tenants of this, this building, keeping their rent as low as possible and trying to keep it as close as possible to operational expenses. So we knew we couldn't lean on a construction loan to fund the construction of the Early Learning Center. We really needed to try to get this paid for entirely as much as possible. So we got significant legislative contributions from the Oregon legislature through lottery bonds in two separate sessions. We got $4.9 million in the 2023 session, and then $1.5 million in the 2024 session. Again, that's all in lottery bonds. And I think that's key. I think it's important to talk about the bonding, especially as we've talked a lot about as an industry statewide, creating more funding opportunities for co-location projects like this. And really, we're leaning a lot on this Build Up Oregon program. But the scale, especially for a 6-classroom early learning center that we have, as you see, the construction costs just for that early learning center were total about $4.8 million. And the scale that Build Up is able to allow through that program just would not allow a early learning center of this size. And so really knowing that a major source of funding is really going to have to be going to the legislature. And we know the legislature has earmarked capital funds for early learning projects from lottery bond funds. So we know that that's going to be a very important source for these kind of projects moving forward. Just sense of the timing. So we broke ground in July of 2024. Here's a better sense of the site right here and its location in Eugene. We're looking at a 16-month construction period, which would take us to November of 2025. And really what we're doing is prioritizing that southern building so that we can get the Leap and Learn Center, get the temporary certificates of occupancy in time for the school year. And getting that ready so that the early learning providers can do their job and not have to do that kind of a couple months into the school year, and just knowing that that's difficult for enrollment, especially for Head Start. So we're really focusing on that southern building and then finishing up the northern building in November. All right, and with that, Judy will talk a little bit more about the context of how this partnership came together.
Hi, all. I'm going to stand up if you don't mind, because I'm sort of back here in the corner. I can see you all. First of all, being an early learning person all my life, it is wonderful to be here. You're a different audience, and it's exciting to be working closer together. But so, as you know, currently, we're sort of in a perfect time where there's a lot of national, state, and local interest in creating quality and affordable childcare, early learning centers, and also affordable housing that's also quality. So we're sort of in a context, and I've spent a lot of my career looking at this, where there's interest, and with interest comes some policy changes and some funding opportunities. And we're excited about that. And this whole journey, at least for many of our early learning providers, started a long time ago. So in Lane County, over 10 years ago, I was personally involved in the director of Head Start of Lane County for our county to work with Pivot Architecture to say, we really need some spaces for early learning. And the three of us got together and we actually developed some prototypes in terms of what would this look like? We drew up plans, what would an early learning center look like? And then we started trying to shop it around. We were looking for places that we could build something like this. There were some private contractors, some developers that were interested, and there were some school districts, how could we make this work? But we couldn't quite get something that worked funding wise. It took us a while, and we got really a taste of what it was like to actually be co-located. We were given a building we were offered a building in Old Elementary School that was being decommissioned in Springfield. And we made this an early learning center, and it was early intervention, early childhood special ed, Head Start, and some other services. And it worked beautifully. There are efficiencies there. There are opportunities for inclusion for kids with disabilities, and there was just space that we could actually do our work. And then, like what happens over and over, the school district needed this space for something else. So we really needed to pack up and move somewhere else. And I tell you that story because that has been the story for early learning over the years. And so it's really been exciting to see some interest. The first time Matt told us, mentioned earlier, the legislature, at least in Oregon, has opened up the opportunity of earmarking some of the lottery bonds for early childhood projects. And they've also funded a co-location funding source that Business Oregon is implementing. It's a start. The funds are not nearly adequate to meet the need, but boy, I think we're going to just keep growing them. So we have this opportunity. And so the reason Head Start and Early Childhood Cares got together to do this. The other part that is different in child care and early learning, we are really long-time programs that have federal funds, state funds, and also a very strong local presence. So we are good candidates to be able to do long-term planning, to really have the runway to spend the 2 or 3 years it takes to really plan these projects. We can bring other child care people along at that point. So it's sort of this great opportunity. So when when this opportunity to co-locate and work with Homes for Good came along, we jumped at it. And in many ways, we were shovel ready. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of the site. So as Matt said, this is in the Jefferson West Side neighborhood. And there was a homeless camp, a large homeless camp on this area that was there for quite a while. It was not a camp that was supported by the city for several reasons. And it is located right next to an elementary school. And in fact, it's an elementary school, Cesar Chavez. That's probably the highest needs elementary school we have. A lot of walkers to school, etc. And this camp was actually, because it wasn't managed, was pretty disruptive sometimes. But the Jefferson West Side neighborhood, they aren't the NIMBY kind of people. They really wanted to be able to support something in their community, but also not create some harm for neighbors or students. So they were super strong advocates to look at affordable housing and to do an alternative right there at that site. So it was a journey, and they advocated for us. And then we went to the City of Eugene Home. It's the Eugene and Springfield Home Funds. So we had to go before them to be able to use those funds for this project. The City of Eugene also had to give us permission to use this property. So through all these levels, from local neighborhood groups to this co-managed group with Eugene Springfield to the city, we had a lot of partners that really worked for us to make sure this happened. And everything along the way got approved, and now we are here and ready to go. And Patrick's going to talk about our team that are there, the early childhood team.
Thank you, Judy. So we have 3 early learning partners with this project. And as Judy had mentioned, it originally started with Early Childhood Cares and with Head Start of Lane County and Homes for Good kind of communicating together. Head Start of Lane County, Head Start in general, it came out of the War on Poverty back in the Johnson administration back in the 60s. And originally originally in Eugene, it was piloted in 67, and Head Start of Lane County grew out of that. It had different names over those years, but it has been around in Lane County since the 60s. And it's a preschool, but it's more than a preschool. It's a high quality program that provides a lot of different services, health, nutrition. We support the families, not just the children. And we're a nonprofit. We're grant funded. We don't charge families for our services, but there's also income guidelines to which families we can serve, because it is to serve families that are in poverty. And we're also an inclusive program. So we work with children with disabilities. There's a mandated 10%, but more often than not, we're in the 20 to 30% range in our classrooms of children who are receiving special education services, which is provided by Early Childhood Cares, who has also been in the community for a long time. I think in its current state, Judy was telling me this morning on the drive up, since the 90s, but even before that, they were under different names and similar services. And then Parkside came into the picture. They are a community preschool. They are also a nonprofit. They serve families of all incomes. And really where they come into play is that Early Childhood Cares is attempting to move away from the classrooms that are special ed specific and into more inclusive classrooms where they're providing support to classrooms that are serving kids with serving kids who are receiving special education services and supporting kids in typically developing classrooms to which we're finding with research is what's best for those kids. And Parkside doesn't have the same income guidelines as Head Start, so it's a little bit easier for Early Childhood Cares to be able to partner in that way with programs that don't have the same income guidelines. But Head Start, Parkside, Early Childhood Cares have been around in the community for a long time. We've partnered with each other, like Judy had said, with the various classrooms and sites over the years that we've been in together, partnering together, kicked out together, finding new places together. We've been doing it for a long time. Really what I think you're getting with this partnership team is a lot of decades and decades of experience of quality childcare and special education services, but also teams that have experience working together and working with other partners. We will have an MOU with the group to help determine how things are run in that center so that Homes for Good isn't telling us, how we need to run the childcare, because they're really great at housing and we're really good at the childcare side of things. So, yeah.
So you can see we had a lot of partners involved in this this idea from the very beginning, kind of years in the making, as Judy mentioned. And anybody who's worked on these or similar projects knows that it's both a marathon and a sprint. And we were really fortunate that we had really involved and engaged partners that wanted to be alongside us when we were in the trenches doing the design work. Which was really great, because what we did is we started out asking everybody, what did they want this community to feel like on opening day? And we polled everybody, we pinned up those words, our internal design team participated in that as well. And we really honed in and focused on those main central themes. Matt had mentioned that this is a 3-acre site. There is not an inch to spare on this site. It was crazy what it came down to. We had a little tiny wedge, literally the size of this table, which was the only place that we could put our site sign. It was between easements and setbacks, and that's how tight it really is. So one of our very first big ideas about the site connected back to the community, and we were building on words of safe, home, belonging, equity, and place. And we spent a lot of time talking about kind of our childhood memories of what it was like to be a kid and what it was like to play on the playground or to connect with friends or to come and go from school and home. And a lot of those kind of foundational memories is really what we brought into this idea, which was a community hug. We had a lot of support from the Jefferson West Side neighborhood, and that as a design idea or a party idea is what you see in the plan, with the buildings being the two arms that are wrapping around the central community area, which contains the playground, a shelter area, a bike loop, a walking loop, lots of different areas to sit, to be together with one another, or to sit by yourself. Opportunities for parents to watch their kids play, opportunities for the older generation to meet the younger kids there and participate in getting to know their families, and really, providing that community, creating that community. So some of the residential features included making sure that we had both passive and active opportunities for the residents. This is a multi-generational development. And so, you want to have places for the kids to be kids and run and play, and also for others to just enjoy the outside. We have a community garden. We have 2 community rooms, one in each of the 2 buildings, that are really going to be programmed for different purposes. The one in the north building is geared towards larger gatherings, where resident services can program events that would include a lot of the community. And then we have a smaller room in the south building that could be a place for yoga or meditation or smaller group, more intimate gatherings. So that was really important, is to have a variety of options. We also have shared laundry rooms in each of the buildings. The 2 and 3 bedroom units have washer dryer hookups, but the 1 bedrooms do not. And then in the south building, what we did was we moved the laundry room up to an upper floor and created a lounge off of that faces down into the playground area, to kind of create different opportunities for people to gather when they're doing laundry. And one of the other ideas that we had around this site, because we had very generous setbacks from the street edge, which really absorbed a lot of our opportunities for programming that space. But what that did is it created a more intimate center space for those common playground areas. And the way that we dealt with parking, so on the north and the south of the site, we have 2 entries into the parking areas. We have 114 parking spaces, and you can't really see it in this diagram, but those are connected by a fire lane that's camouflaged by sidewalks and paving area, a place to have hopscotch and Foursquare and those kinds of things. But we didn't want traffic cutting through the site. And that was really important because we knew there were going to be a lot of families here with kids running around. And we really wanted to push the parking to the edge and not make it a place where people who didn't live there could pass through the site easily. So that's kind of a passive security measure. And then we needed to look at how we were going to deal with the early learning parking and parent pickup and drop off and small bus pickup and drop off. And that's when the church that's directly to the east of the site became one of our partners as well. So there's an agreement in place that allows the Early Learning Center to have access to a limited number of parking spaces that are largely unused during the weekday, and also a safe place for the buses and the parents to do drop off and pick up. And that also put a lot less pressure on our site. It didn't drive up our traffic counts to the point where we needed to do an in-depth traffic analysis, which would have definitely triggered or potentially triggered a lot more requirements and site cost for the development, had that have been a part of the program on site. So that was one of our really great benefits. All right, so another idea that we had related to this notion of a lily pad. And this kind of got uncovered when we were doing our group collaborative design work. And we would have our entire team pin up ideas on the wall, and then our entire design team, Homes for Good. We had a development intern that was actually a resident of affordable housing who was participating in the design, resident services, asset management, our early learning partners. And we would come and we just talk about these kind of silly, fun ideas around what is it like to experience living in this community. And one of the ideas that came forward was the lily pad. And so lily pads have a root system below the water that can be up to 15 feet. And all of these things are kind of architects' fun way of creating analogies and metaphors for the design work that we're doing to kind of bring this extra layer of whimsy into the work. And so we're creating this community that's going to grow these really strong roots, allow these families to have a home where they can feel safe and they can feel like they belong. And when those roots come up to the water's edge and grow those green pads, those pads are actually providing shelter for fish and aquatic life, and also a nice landing pad for frogs and dragonflies and all these other insects that for us created this great metaphor of growth and providing that stability and what reveals itself on the top of the water. And so that was a theme that we continued to play with as we were developing the smaller details of the site. So we have a giant frog that I think is about 6 feet wide. That's actually a centerpiece of the playground area that kids can climb on. The Early Learning Center is called the Leap and Learn Center, and we've incorporated notions around different insects and aquatic life, turtles and fish, as part of our identifying graphics on each of the early learning classrooms. So that was just another piece that you're not necessarily going to see here. So inside of the Early Learning Center, the Leap and Learn Center, we have a large multi-purpose room or a commons area, which can also become a play area for those rainy days that we all experience in Oregon. We also decided to move forward with a warming kitchen rather than a full commercial kitchen. And that's another testament to the partners that the early learning providers have within the community, so they can bring in food rather than having to prepare it on site. That was definitely a cost savings measure from equipment and certainly the code requirements that get kicked in when you do a full commercial kitchen. And then inside we have a teacher prep room for the shared partners, and a teacher break room that are completely separate from the classrooms. We have paired classrooms and restrooms that are shared. We have 4 regular classrooms and 2 that are going to be for infant care, which also introduce some additional code requirements. And then what's really interesting is that there's a shared admin office where they're going to actually share staffing in the front main office right off of the entry with a security vestibule. That was really important to understand. How do you create an entry for the Early Learning Center and also keep it separate from the other residents in the building? Because there are separations that are really important to maintain, and do it in a way where it doesn't feel offensive or obvious or restrictive for the residents. So some of the design lessons learned, as I just mentioned, the controlled entry and access is really important, but we wanted to be able to take advantage of some of the shared spaces. So for instance, everything that you see here in blue is dedicated to the residential side of the development. The green is actually a shared indoor trash room. So the early learning partners and the janitorial services can have access to that trash room. We don't have to create a separate one just for the ELC. And then coming up with a way to provide egress out of the building was really important to make sure that we were meeting code and doing it in a way that didn't duplicate those pathways. So this is really kind of a code exercise in what can we share operationally, and how can we do that in a way within the code that allows us to build on this shared spaces. We have sub-meters set up for the ELC separate from the residential so that those can be monitored and properly allocated. And then probably one of the more bigger impacts was how to deal with the structural geometry of what the classroom proportion wants to be and what the apartments above want to be. And then you layer on top of that the different occupancies for the infant care rooms and the toddler rooms. Those have different requirements. It was really important for us to not introduce any additional exterior doors to those infant classrooms, which is driven by code. And so we classified them as an I4 occupancy, which allowed us to get around that requirement. But then it introduced a whole bunch of new fire rating details and fire separation details. So I will say it's doable. We're going to do it here, but it's really tricky structurally.
Yeah, I think there were also some very interesting, as this is a kind of a new and unique development for us. There were some very interesting lessons learned from a funding perspective as well. I know everyone is talking about, yeah, how do you structure this? How do you structure this commercial early learning center with the residential and make sure that the funding sources aren't touching? And our lenders, we pretty much halfway through our process up until we actually did an RFP for lending, we were pretty much resigned to having to do a condo structure, which we all know comes with a lot of additional legal costs. But our funder, when we actually put out the RFP, all the funders came back and said we could structure this as a prime lease, and that was very appetizing to us, and not having to have that additional layer of complication in the financing. But that put the pressure on us as the prime lease. So Homes for Good would take on the prime lease and be responsible for subleasing to the early learning partners as tenants. And that really puts the onus and responsibility on Homes for Good to take on the risk of if anyone might cancel their lease. But it's definitely something because we have the relationships that we have and we're committed to long-term leases, that's definitely a risk that we're willing to take on for this project. But I think with the prime lease, that also put the onus on us to make sure that we were, especially in this construction phase, making sure that we're very clearly delineating the costs for the residential construction, which are home funds, city lift and 4% funds. Those can't touch the commercial aspect at all. So making sure that we're really closely monitoring our books and monitoring our pay apps to make sure that they're structured in a way that it's very clear that none of the funds that are specifically for residential are touching the this early learning center construction element. And I think, Judy, did you want to talk about the rents at all, or the leases?
I think what Matt said is that's why when we were talking about the early learning partners, why we emphasize the fact it's really helpful to have partners that have federal and state money and a strong history of funding. I think that really gives you some sense of security. And the reason a preschool like Parkside came on later, you know, these are businesses that fluctuate with what parents can pay and enrollment. So getting a mix is super important. And when we actually sat down, I think I mentioned earlier that we've been working on this for over 10 years, we made an assumption that we would take on a loan and pay it off with rents. Then when we actually got to the point where we were a little bit short of funding for the Early Learning Center, that we thought we would just fill that gap with a commercial loan. And we actually ran those numbers and we looked at what it was going to cost rents for each one of our programs, adding in the cost to pay off the loan. It became prohibitive. It was really clear to us, this is not a sustainable plan. And again, we have really solid funding. So that's when we went back to the legislature. But it was a good learning for us. And it's something I know personally I'm going to work on policy-wise, because childcare is considered commercial. So they have to do commercial loans. And it's sort of funny when you think about a federal and state-funded program like Head Start or Early Childhood Care is falling under that. So I think we have some work to do to clear that deck. But in the meantime, getting full funding, I think, is critically important, especially if you're counting on your tenants to cover the costs of maintenance, and which is reasonable in a rent. But none of us are funded to pay these kinds of extra costs. I just wanted to highlight one other thing if we had time. So I think Patrick talked about Head Start being free, which it is to everyone that attends, with an eligibility and income eligibility. Early childhood care services for kids with developmental delays and disabilities is also free, but they have to be eligible for services, which we have a lot of kids in common that are. Parkside really rounds out that equation because they can take children whose families get ERDC, which is employment-related daycare, which is a subsidy. So if you don't quite make that cutoff for Head Start, but you still can't afford quality income, there are some subsidies. So Parkside can take that, and they have the whole sliding scale. So it rounds out our ability to serve any family that's in the neighborhood. Head Start also has a priority, or any of our programs, to recommend families to enroll in the affordable housing. The Head Start families for sure will qualify, and it would be wonderful, if they had some kind of priority to be there. But we also know kids grow up really fast and people stay in their homes a lot. So we're hoping to have it, volunteers of older people who live in the affordable housing working with our center. As I said, we're across the street from an elementary school. That's a really great elementary school, and they have an after-school program, and we can also offer extra space and coordinate there. So we feel like we'll be able to accommodate needs as kids grow as well. Did that? Great. How many of you are aware that we live in a childcare desert in Oregon? Yeah, I think it's been, as I started out, there is a huge amount of both national, state, and local attention on the lack of affordable or even the existence of childcare. So the larger we can make these centers, the better. The need is there. And we also have families at so many different levels of need. And so we're really excited that this does provide that. But, it's a drop in the bucket. We have to develop more and more of these. And so the need for affordable childcare is great. And we didn't want to cut back on, 6 classrooms is going to make some progress in our community, but we have a lot more to make. And we did make the decision to have some infant toddler classrooms, which is even a bigger desert out there than preschool. So we're trying to meet all those needs.
Thank you. And I just wanted to mention that as kind of our reasoning for wanting a 6 classroom early learning center from the beginning. But also knowing that the sources out there, especially build up, are just not sufficient enough to build to a scale that's needed. And that's why I think it's important for us to continue to push on additional sources and really push on the legislature for more sources of funding for these types of projects and these scales of projects as well in terms of the early learning center construction. One additional lesson learned was just, really, as a developer, we have experience with construction all the time and new construction, but it has been a learning curve to realize, oh yeah, we're not speaking the same language as we've worked with our partners and tried to keep them up to date on progress. And a great example of that is when we got our estimate back based on DD, and it was quite high. We were looking at like a $1.5 million increase versus what the previous estimate that we had received. And I communicated that back to the partners just to show where we're at. We're factoring in pulling out that construction loan that we had been planning on. And the early learning partners who aren't used to the scale of like, oh, we're $1.5 million over budget. They're like, well, I guess this isn't happening. Pack it up. And we're like, no, this is kind of our bread and butter. We'll VE this out. Don't worry. Like this is going to happen. And this is going to happen in like 4 months. So don't worry about it. We'll get there. So yeah, I mean, obviously when you have those high of estimates come in that there's a lot of VE and that has to happen, and it did lead to some difficult conversations, but luckily we again just something that I wasn't even worried about was like, oh well, Judy and Patrick were like, I guess this isn't happening anymore. But I think really luckily once we went to final bid, the pricing came in a lot lower than we were expecting, and we basically got back our entire estimating contingency, which was super helpful. So now we're in a stage where we made a lot of difficult decisions a few months ago in terms of value engineering, and now we have a little bit more money in the budget from that contingency to put a lot of those really important features back. All right, now we'll happy to take any questions, and I think Esteban is going to walk the mic around.
All right, I've got a few. I'm with the Habitat for Humanity affiliate in a rural area, Newburgh, Dundee, and we're looking at a multi-use project where a Head Start facility could be on the bottom floor, and then we build Habitat homes above that, 4 homes. And we are also working with a church that will probably sell us the land to make this happen. So LIFT funding, how, maybe this is too technical for this setting, but how did you structure it so that you didn't touch funding for the early child care facilities, number one? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so really for all of our residential sources, like I mentioned, LIFT, 4% tax credits, private activity bonds, and the home funds that we received, none of those can touch the early learning center construction. So really, we had some just being upfront with our general contractor really was what it came down to, and making sure that when we receive pay apps, and that means that they have to talk to their subs to break out the pricing. From the beginning, we wanted to make sure that our estimates were breaking out the residential construction and having the early learning center construction costs broken out in 2 different columns, and then just seeing the grand total at the bottom, but making sure from the get-go that that was our expectation, and that took some coaching with our general contractor, and it also took additional work with them to work with their subs to say, we need the pricing to be broken out. This is how many windows you're doing for the early learning center, and we need just making sure that they're communicating with the subs to make sure that they're doing that additional layer of due diligence, and making sure that when we get pay applications that it is very clear what is being charged to which portion of the project.
This is a really quick question, but related to that, how did you split out the site work and the play area? Because you're addressing both the residential. So did tax credits pay for any of that or all of it, or how did that work?
Yeah, that was a very key question for us, especially as we're making our estimates as well, is yeah, what costs are we attributing, especially as it's in the same building? And really what we came down to is a percentage of square footage. So the Early Learning Center is 13% of the square footage of the total project. And there are, but then also recognizing that there are distinct aspects to each project. The parking is not for the Early Learning Center. The parking is for resident use. So making sure that the parking and site costs related to parking lots are were dedicated completely to residential and could generate that basis really for us. But then knowing that the Early Learning Center playground, for example, that doesn't make sense to charge to include in basis. So making sure we're going line by line and seeing what makes sense to be one or the other 100%, or 13% of the flooring costs is. And we definitely had a lot of conversations with our tax credit accountant as well, just to say, these are the assumptions that we're making. Is this the direction that we should go before we go too far down this road? And they were on board with that. So as long as the tax credit CPA is okay with it, then we're okay with it.
I have to ask this question. Was the project prevailed Boley? The entire? Was there any discussion with Boley or pushback on that and the impact to the project?
This is probably too strong of a word, but we were pretty much resigned to bully from the beginning. We just knew it probably wasn't worth the fight and we wouldn't get anywhere. So we just budgeted for bully from the beginning. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing with us with your project. It's hopefully I can replicate it. Just a couple of questions here. So you mentioned that the cost for the classrooms was $4.8 million. I'm curious, is that like the core and shell and the tenant improvement works? And if it's not, does it include any sort of like lease concessions that you're providing, given to the providers? And then two other follow-up questions is, are there any housing opportunities for the staff of the daycare providers? And then also, what was the biggest design challenge?
Thanks. Those are all great questions. And yeah, I did mention 4.8. It's a little bit higher. That was just when I mentioned that was just the construction costs. So a little bit more for soft costs, about 5.5 million total. But that does include tenant improvements. I think this is a unique project in that Homes for Good is the holder of the lease and is subleasing out to the early learning providers. It seems harsh to call you tenants because we're such close partners, but really it's a unique project. And I mean, it's unique for us as well. I haven't done any commercial developments before and just learning about tenant improvements, but knowing that really the way that we thought about tenant improvements is because we're holding the lease and because we are also committed to this being an early learning center, no matter who the tenants are, that we're factoring those tenant improvements into the construction costs entirely. Because if for whatever reason, Parkside Community Preschool, they're not able to renew their lease, we are going to find another partner. We're not going to change this to anything else other than an early learning center because that's the need that our community has. And then did you have, was there one thing, another part of your question I didn't touch? Oh yeah. So yeah, we talked a little bit around. I mean, there was a lot of just trying to find funding out there, especially as we're trying to close this gap when costs were increasing. Is one of the partnerships that we reached out to was, oh, could we reach out to Lane County and could they throw some money into the construction cost in exchange for some percentage of the childcare slots for county employees. We're trying to be as creative as possible, but we did not talk about, I think because they're all project-based voucher units, we have not talked about specifically reserving any units for staff. But certainly I imagine that there are a number of staff who would qualify for project-based vouchers. Do you want to, anyone else want to talk to any other design challenges?
Well, I would say there were a lot on this project, and most of them were all driven by the tightness of the site. Trying to navigate, I mean, there's really no spare inches on this site. You know, and that really drove us into, for instance, the stormwater solutions are largely in planters on the edges of the parking lots, which also drives up the cost, right? So we were driven into some design solutions that were not necessarily the most affordable, that carried extra cost, but were necessary in order to get all of these things to come together. I think, you know, during design, when you're trying to make decisions, I mentioned it's a marathon and a sprint. You know, once we get the go that we received funding, the turnaround on the documentation is so fast. And navigating that with all of the partners, we had a CMGC that was brought on board for pre-construction, who's also building the project, and working through ideas of, you know, can we spare an extra 6 inches in the floor-to-floor height? To how are we going to deal with the parapet height and roof tie-off anchors, right? All of those choices in the course of design have real dollar implications, and we need to make them quick. And so I think that just the speed of decision making and making informed decisions was probably the biggest challenge, knowing that we had no wiggle room to do much of anything on the site.
I just wanted to add something to the question about the funding. So Matt and I, when we realized we were going to be a little bit short of what we needed, we did talk to all of our county city partners. We talked to some foundations. And I guess I want to say is if we had started from the beginning, I wouldn't be discouraged in your communities to really use those sources. We were just sort of scrambling. It was hard to get anything really in short order. But some of the larger foundations are really, this is on their radar. For sure. And so they are definitely funding sources worth pursuing depending on what you're doing. And people were super open to the project. I think it was the county that had some energy saving grants, so we could, you know, we could have pulled in some things to really help with our funding. So people were working hard, and proactively you probably could get those partners engaged too.
So I think I heard you say you have 80 vouchers on 81 units. How did that happen? Thank you. I missed that part. Thanks.
That was also my question, but could you get into a little more detail? I understand the housing authority. Could you talk a little bit more about that process?
So we are now moved to work agency, and part of that flexibility allows us the ability to give project-based vouchers to ourselves for any project without having to go through an RFP process. That was not the case when we applied for the project-based vouchers for this project. We hadn't become a move to work agency yet. So we did go through an RFP process that our rent assistance division put out. And we, as the development department, had to apply for these 80 project-based vouchers for the units. It was an open RFP that was available to any developers. And we had to make sure that it was very clear that it was one department applying to another department, and that there were very clear demarcations that we were acting as if any other developer and not just awarding them to ourselves.
My question is, can you talk a little bit more about the benefit for the residents in having an early learning center and on site? And then maybe Judy, if you can mention how many childcare slots are being created by this project?
I think that really the benefits are innumerable, especially with the site that we have. Thinking about being across the street from an elementary school, there's actually an alternative high school around the corner. So theoretically, a kid could be born at Ollie Court and not have to get in a car to get their educational needs met for their entire life, or I guess until middle school. And so that's pretty astounding. I think that obviously having those childcare opportunities allows for parents to have more ability to seek opportunities for themselves instead of having to focus on child rearing. So I think the benefits are huge, both from a community standpoint for the residents themselves, and being able to pursue opportunities that are allowed to them without having to watch their kids all day. And then also even just from the decreased carbon footprint of the kids being able to walk across the street to school is huge.
Boy, I think there are numerous. First of all, your question about how many slots there'll be, we have about 80. Because we have 6 classrooms, preschool technically can have 18 to 20 kids in a classroom, and toddler, it's smaller, it's 10. So the fact we dedicated 2 of the classrooms to infant toddlers, it brings us to about 80 slots, which is a good number. You know, and I know we're going to fill them right up, and probably at least 30% of those kids will have some kind of need some supports. So the advantages to me of the families who live there, first of all, just living next to young kids, I think it's really a mental health good thing. You know, you can hear kids laughing, and, you know, the whole idea of mixed ages is really wonderful. Also opportunities, as I said, to volunteer if people want to do that and read to kids, and it'll be easy. And of course, if you need the care and this works for you, it's just walk your child there. You know, it's perfect. So and being co-located on a scale of 6 classrooms is incredibly efficient. Our providers are driving from place to place to place, and it's just to be able to be in one site, you can really meet kids' needs so much better. We have so much skill and expertise in the same building. We might have to run a social emotional group or have sensory things, but you have so many more options when you're in the same building. Did that answer your question? Enough? Yeah. Yes. I'll tell you, so I did say for Head Start, they have the opportunity to actually enroll, to suggest someone that wants to enroll in one of the units and is eligible. So they would certainly have priority. For early childhood cares, again, I said they have to have eligibility, but they live there. We place kids and serve kids as close to home as possible. So absolutely. And then Parkside has more than one site, and they'll prioritize kids who live there for sure. So that's our commitment for sure, given our programs, policies, and how we work. Yeah.
And I'd just like to add quickly to that one of the things that Head Start has been doing for a long time, we haven't done anything like this before, where it's been co-location with the design in mind to be for Head Start. Head Start we're in housing with St. Vincent de Paul's, we're in housing with Homes for Good, but a lot of it is giving us space after something's been built and us then having to retrofit it to our needs. And with all of those projects, we have always given priority to the families that live in those housing developments because they meet our income guidelines, and we really want to serve children as close to home as possible.
Yeah, and one of our challenges is just making sure that, or trying to ensure that the units are serving families who are going to benefit from the early learning center on site. Leap and Learn Center on site, so to that end, yeah, Head Start will be able to refer families for units, and we also have two other partners who serve low-income families, Eugene Relief Nursery and Parenting Now, which is a nonprofit in Eugene. Will both be able to refer families that they serve for units, because one thing that's come up in our conversations too is that the income qualifications for voucher units and for Head Start are similar but very different. So making sure that that families income qualify for both programs will be a worthwhile challenge to figure out.
So I have a question about access control for the resident and child care center. Are they completely separated? Are the kids living in the housing portion able to use the playground?
So yes, they are completely separate. And that was intentional, right? Because the Early Learning Center needs to maintain their security at all times. They will have some staff that are able to access the commons area of the residential ground floor for the purposes of trash, but everything else is completely separate. And then on the site, because we have licensing regulations, the Early Learning Center has two playgrounds based on ages that is enclosed with a 4-foot tall fence. And the hope is that there will be shared use during off hours of the Early Learning Center. So during the day, the kids are there, they have access to their age-appropriate playground areas, and then after hours, the hope is that all residents could have access to that. But in a way, that it's duplicated play space, right? That's one area where we didn't cut anything short, and that was just intentional because from a management point of view, we want to see how it goes, and then also just making sure that the residents always have access to play.
We do have some experience with other sites like that. That is our hope, that as on weekends and after hour, the community play on our playgrounds, and that's worked really well in other sites. So we anticipate that being very successful. We hope it is. And I wanted to add one more thing to your question about use and access. We have done evening things with parenting education and programming is in the common room in the Early Learning Center that our programs would sponsor. And if they're topics that other residents that might have kids would be open to it, I think those kinds of invitations would be open for other things that might be of interest to residents who have children. So if you have a parenting education series going on, they would have a priority to also participate.
And I think to that end as well, just wanted to mention how important having property management in these conversations from the get-go has been, especially as we talk about after hours access. I mean, we do want to make sure that the Early Learning Center is secure, and that any after hours use is yeah, meets the security requirements of the center itself. So just really having property management in the conversations about there is this multi-purpose room that could be used. We'll have to work very closely together to make sure that the partners in property management are working hand in hand to make sure that that everyone's needs are met. And I think back to the playgrounds as well. Yes, we do have four distinct play structures on the site. Two for the Early Learning Center, as Kelly mentioned, and then two for the residents. And one thing we've talked about as well is the ability for the kids at the Early Learning Center to take a field trip to the resident play structures that aren't behind the 4-foot fence that's required by licensing. All right, well, one more, a couple more maybe.
Just super quick, could you share kind of like square footage wise what the play structure outside kind of square footage looks like for the childcare as well as the indoor program space?
Great question. I don't have those numbers on the top of my head. The outside play areas are just barely above the minimum required because of the limited site area that we had. And then the commons area is it's quite large. I believe it's I want to say it's about 20 by 20. And it also has a direct door that goes out to the site facing the playground areas. So there is direct access there for events that both Matt and Judy were talking about. And then once you get inside of the building, if there was an event outside and it's after hours, another security feature that we incorporated is that all of the doors that are along the main corridor to the classrooms and to the other spaces are lockable. So you could very easily host an after hours event and secure the rest of the daycare facility after hours at the same time. And I would say the overall size of the commons was largely dictated again by the other factors of first and foremost getting the 6 classrooms in the building. And so it was this exercise of what's left over and fitting that in.
Can you talk a little bit about the prime lease structure as it relates to insurance for liability and property? Is that if Homes for Good is the prime leasee, so leasee, what is that passed through to the early childhood center? And if you can just talk about how insurance relates to the prime lease.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, I think that's especially as we know, insurance costs are going through the roof and changing rapidly. So that was one of the major calculations as we factored in what would rent look like and pulling back, committing to not using a construction loan, really wanting to keep rent down to maintenance reserves and utilities and operations costs, and insurance being within those operations costs as well. So we will hold the insurance we'll hold the insurance, but we will pass the cost down to the tenants through their rent.
So as a former educator, I know that a lot of volunteers and staff have to be enrolled in the CBR to just volunteer. And so I was wondering what kind of restrictions are placed on the tenants as far as like their accessibility to the children there, because they will have that playground where they could just be in the courtyard. They will have that shared space where they can commingle. And are the tenants going to be restricted to just families, or how are you guys approaching this?
I think that's why we want to keep the residential. I mean, even from an operations standpoint, keep the residential and or Leap and Learn Center uses as distinct as possible. That if kids are going to these central play areas, that it's very clear that that's a field trip, and they're actually leaving the grounds of the Early Learning Center itself, so that we're not putting an undue burden on the tenants. We certainly aren't only leasing to families. Whoever qualifies for the units, especially for those 1 bedrooms, we imagine there'll be quite a few seniors. It'll be a quite desirable property for seniors as well.
Yes. So I think maybe you didn't, there's fencing around the early learning playgrounds. So someone can't just enter during operation hours. So there would definitely be a separation for sure. Correct. It would be after school hours or weekends. Yeah. Right now we're ending at 3, but many of our families need aftercare. So we're talking about making sure we meet those needs. So it's altogether possible. We'll be doing that.
And I believe Parkside is a full day program. So they do preschool and then wraparound services. So they're a 10-hour program. So they typically run 7:30 to 5:30. And so the playground would potentially be utilized by them that late. Head Start typically they'll be running a school day like equivalent length of time. So it'll be in that 2:30, 3 o'clock range that they'll be likely ending class. And newer licensing regulations actually only require volunteers to have a CBR if they're being left alone with children. So we don't actually have to have volunteers have the CBRs if they're not being left alone with children. And we don't allow volunteers to be left alone with children anyway. So it kind of works out.
Any other final questions, sir? We can let you go to lunch. Oh yeah, Judy.
I don't know, you might already know this, but the early childhood, early learning programs are required to have a pretty high level, very high level of liability and other insurance. We all get state and federal money, including Parkside, if you're getting reimbursed for food or you're getting, taking employment-related daycare. So and probably in that, when our leases, we'll be having to demonstrate that, but it's a good level of liability. I think you'd be reassured. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your interest in this project, and hope you have a great lunch.